Howdy, folks, and welcome to the Daily Coin. My name is Rory, and today is Monday, February the 8th, 2016. I have the great honor and pleasure of welcoming to the show for the first time Mr. Brandon Smith, who is the proprietor and publisher of alt-market.com. How you doing today, Brandon?
Hi, Rory. Thanks for having me on the show.
Well, I'm certainly glad that you're here. We've got a very interesting show lined up, and we'll just get right to it. What do you say?
I'm glad to be a part of it.
With what fresh horror awaits the economy after Fed rate hike, and that actually inspired me to write an article of my own about that, because it was so powerful what you had written. It just really kind of set me back in my chair. I mean, it really did. And you had actually predicted back in August. It says, in August, I made this prediction concerning the Fed rate hike decision. And this is a quote. It says, the Federal Reserve push for a rate hike will likely be determined before 2015 is over. Talk of a September increase in interest rates may be a ploy, and a last-minute decision to delay could be on the table. This tactic of edge of the seat meetings and surprise delays was used during QE taper scenario, which threw a lot of analysts off their guard and caused many to believe that a taper would never happen. Well, it did happen, just as a rate hike will happen, only slightly later than mainstream analysts expect. And you predicted that it was going to come at the end of the year, which it did. It came on December the 16th. And also in this article you wrote, and you were talking about Ben Bernanke at a conference to honor Milton Friedman on November the 8th in 2002, and you quoted Ben Bernanke, where he told this audience the truth, which is the truth today, which is what Richard Fisher did not too long ago. And this is a direct quote from Bernanke. It says, in short, according to Friedman and Schwartz, because of institutional changes and misguided doctrines, the banking panics of the Great Contraction were much more severe and widespread than would have normally occurred during a downturn. Let me end my talk by abusing slightly my status as an official representative of the Federal Reserve. I would like to say to Milton and Anna regarding the Great Depression, you're right. We did it. We're very sorry, but thanks to you, we won't do it again. Well, they're not going to do that exactly again. They're going to do something almost like that, but only slightly different. Right? I mean, and isn't that exactly what's happening right now? The banks have the too big to jail banks have all these massive reserves at the Federal Reserve. Same thing that happened in the Great Depression. They weren't making loans to the citizens. Same thing, they did that in the Great Depression. They're doing that now. They made these what appeared to be misguided policy changes, like a slight interest rate on December the 16th, that looks completely wrong, but is completely right in the absolute destruction of the currency and the economy. Are they going to continue to do that this year?
I believe so. I believe that their plot points or dot map, or the report that they put out concerning interest rate hikes says that they're going to raise rates 4 times this year. That may or may not occur 4 times. I do believe that it's going to happen at least a couple more times before the year is over, despite the fact that so many mainstream analysts are claiming that the Fed will not hike rates at all because of the downturn in the economy, and clearly it's a policy error, and there's no way that they'll continue with this policy error if it's affecting the markets the way it is. I would say that they're well aware of the effects that interest rate hikes are having on the system, and that they're planning to continue to use them as sort of an incremental mechanism to bring down the markets one stage at a time. And my position is that the Fed is initiating a controlled demolition of our economy. They've decided that we're going to move into the next stage of whatever the globalists have planned for us. And I don't go too deeply into that in the article you're referring to, but I have in many articles in the past. And people have to remember that the Federal Reserve is not, has no loyalty to American society, the American government per se, the nation at large. They have no loyalty to us. Their loyalties lie in the philosophy of globalism, and their goal, as is the goal of all globalists, is to centralize all economic power into one central edifice. So that means a single global currency, a single monetary and economic authority, and eventually a single global government. And as it stands right now, the U.S. dollar and the American system, or American society, is in the way of that program. And we have to be taken down. They need to take us down a few notches in order to make way for their global system to be implemented. And that's why the Fed is deliberately bringing down our markets, deliberately hiding the destabilization of our economy. They're deliberately doing these things because they're making way for this new global system, which Christine Lagarde at the IMF calls the Great Economic Reset.
And they've been describing this for several years now, going all the way back to 1988. I mean, they went into great detail, and you wrote about that as well. And the fall of America signals the rise of the New World Order, where you went through and picked apart everything that these globalists have said, and brought into the fold the BRICS and the importance of their role in all of this, talking about the new world, the world currency, the world governments. I mean, all of these things have been, and this is not theories. These are not theories that we're discussing. They're facts. These people have been talking about these things through the UN, through the United Nations, through the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, through the Bank for International Settlement, the BIS, through all of these other global institutions. And what role do you see China playing going forward? I mean, obviously all of the power is moving to China. Is that where you see this new centralized government and monetary edifice manifesting from?
Well, I would see China as sort of the new, as George Soros, in an interview back in 2009, 2010, I believe, stated that China is sort of the backup economic engine for this global system. And as America kind of goes down the tubes, the elites need places to transfer their wealth whenever an empire falls. And if you look back throughout history, that's what they've done. They were always ahead of the game, right, usually because they caused the collapse in the first place.
Exactly.
But they've always been ahead of the game. So what they do is they collapse these systems, and people are always saying or arguing, well, why would they kill the golden goose? Why would they collapse the United States and hurt their own their own profit machine? They don't understand how liquid wealth can be, and how easily the elites can shift wealth and transfer wealth out of one system into another. They're not harmed by an American collapse, or they won't be. they've already set the stage for their own wealth to be transferred into other areas while this occurs. So they're not killing the golden goose. There is no golden goose. That's what people need to understand. They have this illusion that there's only one place that the elites can hide out and have their seat of power and hold their wealth. That's not practical. The reality is they can move the seat of power anywhere they want. They can transfer their wealth anywhere they want. I believe China is a part of that scenario. China has, for anyone who thought that China was sort of was going to be a counter weight to the West or to Western banking powers. China was recently inducted into the IMF's SDR system, so that
Exactly.
completely dashed any concept that China was somehow anti-globalist and anti-banker. They're not. Russia, it's kind of the same thing. Russia's a member of the Bank of International Settlements, just like China. They're all members of these globalist entities. They're not anti-banker. All right, they may appear to be anti-America, but that doesn't mean they're anti-banker. So as far as China goes, I think it's just another area in which the elites can shift wealth back and forth while this economic downturn occurs.
Okay. And I'm glad to hear you say those things, Brandon, because I've been saying that for a while. I was saying, that Russia and China and the United States were all working out of the same playbook, and that's exactly what you just described. And then I was given some other evidence that said, well, maybe they're not. Maybe they are going against the powers that be, and it does appear that China and Russia and the Western world are all working out of the same playbook, playing their different roles. Good cop, bad cop, good guy, bad guy one day, and then that role switches the next day. And how does the AIIB, the Asia Infrastructure Bank, which is supposed to be the counterbalance to the IMF and the World Bank, and China and Russia both instituting an alternative SWIFT system as well, because the SWIFT system that is run through Belgium was used as an economic weapon against Iran, and that's when Russia stepped up and said, wait a minute, we're not going to have that. And that's when they developed their own, and at the same time China did as well. And both of those systems are now functioning. So how does that play out in what you're describing?
Well, if you look at statements coming out of the BRICS conferences, especially in, I believe, 2013, 2014, what you see is the BRICS representatives that go to those conferences, they'll openly admit in statements that their goal is not to counter the IMF. Their goal is to work with the IMF and the system that the IMF has created. So that they openly admit that they're working closely with the IMF. The other issue is that the BRICS Bank, or the AIIB, a lot of their function is reliant on IMF either cash infusions or cooperation. So that's something that a lot of people don't know, is that the BRICS Bank would not even be able to function without the existence of the IMF. So it's kind of it's hard for people to argue the case that the East is creating a counterweight system to the West when they're reliant on Western banking interests in order to do that. It doesn't make sense, right?
No.
So what's going on here on the surface, and this is they've done this throughout history, especially in modern history. If you look at, I would highly recommend people read any of the works of a guy named Anthony Sutton. He did books on Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution. He did books on Wall Street and the Third Reich. And what you see is banking interests will finance both sides of a geopolitical conflict. They'll finance both sides. They'll play both sides, and it's kind of, I would equate it to a guy playing chess with himself. He has no opponent. He's just playing. He plays the black side and the white side, and he decides who makes the wrong move. He decides whether the black side or the white side wins in the game because he's the only player. That's how the globalists have set up geopolitics in the world today. They funded the Bolshevik Revolution. They aided the Bolshevik Revolution. They created a communist empire in Russia, Soviet Union. They helped the Soviet Union up through even through the 80s, I believe they were helping Soviet Union. But all of that entire time, we thought there was an East versus West, this Cold War. It wasn't real. It was created out of thin air by the globalists. It's the same situation here. This time it's just, it's not Cold War in terms of necessarily nuclear warfare. It's more of a war in terms of economic warfare. And that's what we're being set up for today is when the American system collapses, the Western citizens are supposed to blame Eastern interests, and Eastern interests are supposed to say, well, it was the decadence of the West, it was their foolishness, and they brought it on themselves. So they're not supposed to have any empathy for us, and we're supposed to hate them. That's the way they've set the stage, the narrative for all of this to go down. When in reality, it wasn't necessarily our decadence that caused it. It was the bankers that sabotaged our entire system for the past several decades. Their goal in doing this is to make sure that when everything collapses, the people who are affected and harmed by this do not have any attention on the banks. That we do not blame them. Their goal is to avoid any blame for this situation, and that means, and that may even mean sacrificing certain banking institutions that are peripheral to what they need to create their global system, and that includes the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is not. It's an expendable appendage of the globalist system. It's not as if they can't do without it. And I believe that they may end up sacrificing the Fed as a play to get their new global Fed or their new global central bank.
Okay. And do you see all of this kind of playing out over the next couple of years? I mean, because you cited the article written in 1988 by the Economist referencing the Phoenix world currency coming to life sometime in 2017, 2018. I mean, are the timelines all lining up for that, or do you think that it's going to be a little bit longer timeline than that, or how do you see it playing out?
Well, anytime I do make a prediction, I base it exactly on what the globalists and international financiers say they're going to do. So I don't just pull predictions out of thin air. I look at what they say.
I'm not, and we sure don't want you to do that.
Right.
There's enough guessing going on out there. We need to know what these guys are saying because they hold the cards. Period.
Exactly. So you don't have to have a crystal ball. All you have to do is look at exactly what they say. And that's why I have been relatively, I would say about 90 to 95% accurate on my predictions because I'm only looking at what they say they're going to do, and then I tell people, look, I think they're actually going to do what they say they're going to do. And some people believe me and some people don't. but I was able to predict the taper based on the Fed's own statements. I predicted the timing of the interest rate hikes based on Fed statements. I predicted the inclusion of China in the SDR based on IMF statements. So I'm only relaying to people what they, it's clearly they're doing what they say they're going to do.
Right.
And as far as the global currency, global economic authority, and global currency situation, the Rothschild-owned magazine, The Economist, back in 1988, published an article. I believe it was titled "Get Ready for a World Currency by 2018." In that article, they basically outline everything that's happening today, including the reduction of major economies to make way for an SDR system. They state plainly that the SDR would be a median stepping stone towards a global currency system. So the SDR is sort of that's the bridge over to a global currency, and that's what a lot of mainstream analysts don't understand. They'll argue, well, the SDR isn't a real currency, so how could it be a global currency? They don't understand that it's a median step. It's a bridge towards what the globalists want.
Well, it is. It is. I want to interrupt you just for a second because the SDR is a currency, right?
Exactly.
These guys traded amongst themselves, among nations, and they didn't put China in third position, right out of the gate because it's not important. I mean,
right?
SDR
exactly.
is huge.
It is a currency. It's just not a widely traded currency yet. And not too long ago, Christine Lagarde from the IMF made a statement saying that the SDR was not only a currency, she said it was the currency of currencies. So what does that tell you? That tells me the currency of currencies tells me that they intend for it to become a global currency system.
So the SDR is you see that, and it makes sense that it would be used as a bridge to to move from a scattered, if you will, economic currencies being used all over the euros and dollars, Canadian dollars, Australian dollars, reals, whatever they are, all over the world. So you introduce the SDR and everybody starts trading in that. And then that's the bridge, like you said, to the Phoenix. So, and according to...
Right. And what they, I think, and they actually have, I think, outlined this pretty clearly for everyone, the intention, which is that the SDR will replace the dollar first as world reserve. So you'll see the SDR basket used in the place of the dollar for major international trade, for oil trade, so on and so forth. And then most people will retain their national currencies for a time. So we'll still have our dollars with the presidents on them, and it won't seem as though we're losing our currency system. Not that it's that great a currency system, but I prefer a national currency system to an international currency system.
Yes.
But we'll retain our dollars for a time, and they'll slowly cycle out sovereign currencies or national currencies and replace that with whatever this global currency will be called. In the article, they call it the Phoenix.
Yep. And that's really where we're at right now. I mean, but there's a wrinkle that is pinging the back of my head here, and it's with the situations that are going on with Syria and Iran just, within the last week saying that they were no longer going to accept dollars and that they're working with Russia and that they're going to start either accepting euros or gold for their oil. Now, how do these different situations where these countries are dropping the dollar, China and Russia being most notable, Iran, how does this all fit into what you've been describing, Brandon?
Well, actually, in that article you mentioned, what fresh horror awaits the economy after Fed rate hike. In that article, I have a section about the loss of petro status for the dollar and why I believe that's the next sort of trigger event towards a global currency system. When OPEC nations decide to depeg from the dollar, which is for decades been the traditional currency used around the world to buy and sell oil. When they depeg from the dollar, that's going to actually help the globalists in their goal to bring the SDR in as a world reserve currency. Because once petro status is lost for the dollar, the value and power of the dollar is going to, I would say, basically be smashed. I'd bring the value down by at least half almost immediately if we lose petro status. It would be a disaster for our currency system if we lost petro status. And we've had not only Iran moving completely away from the dollar, we've had Saudi Arabia threatening to depeg from the dollar for various reasons. Some officials might say that they're angry that we won't intervene more in the Middle East to their benefit. Others will say that the collapse in oil prices is killing the Saudi economy, and they have to depeg from the dollar in order to raise the prices higher and stabilize their own system. So, whatever excuse is used, the script that the globalists have written, I believe, says that the dollar is going to lose petro status next. And when it does, then you'll have entities like the IMF and the BIS coming in and saying, well, we have a major crisis on our hands because of the dollar. We need an alternative quickly in order to stabilize the global economy. How about our SDR basket system? Why not use that as a world reserve? That would be more fair than having one sovereign currency be the sole world reserve. That's the argument that they'll make when this all happens. And people will be, I think, malleable at that point. A lot of people would accept that idea at that point because the crisis will be so prominent and so frightening that a lot of people will do anything in order to avoid it.
Problem, reaction, solution. Do you think that this is, or according to your analysis, I should say, Brandon, are they pointing towards several months, do you think? Do you believe in this period where I know it's happening right now. I know that, what we're discussing is actually happening as we speak. They are depegging. They're moving away. All of these countries are moving away from the petrodollar and from the dollar altogether. My audience is well versed in that. And how quickly will this happen, do you think? Is this going to be like a thief in the night, or is this going to just continue to be a slow bleed over the next few months?
I think, I'll stick to my record of going by what the elites say they're going to do, and I would say that they're sticking to the plan they admitted to in the Economist, which was to have a global currency by 2018. In order to get to a global currency by 2018, that's only 2 years away, or at least to get to the beginning foundation of a global currency. In the next 2 years, you would have to have some pretty substantial crises occur. In order to create a public psychology that is malleable enough to convince the masses to go along with the global system. So they're going to have some serious crises within the next 2 years in order to get to a point where they can start introducing a global currency system. So I would say within the next 2 years, you're going to have a severe crisis in the United States. Probably a severe crisis. I'm sorry?
That dovetails right into the Fed raising interest rates on 4 different occasions this year, because the first one is already, what they did on December the 16th is already causing some major stresses and strains. We're already starting to see a lot of red in the equities markets. We're starting to see a lot of green in the precious metals markets. One's going up, one's going down. And so it would make sense that the Federal Reserve would, in fact, stick to their 4 points, their 4 interest rate rises this year, which each one will ratchet up the pressure a little bit more and move it in the direction that they want. Not so much as creating chaos in the streets, but just bleeding the patient a little bit more each time. Is that about right? Or does that sound about right?
Yes, I would say that's about the gist of it. What people need to understand is that the Fed rate hikes are. People need to ask an important question: why would the Fed hike rates in the first place when no one asked them to do it? Why would they do that? No one asked them to. Why are they suddenly doing it? And it's clearly the rate hikes, as some analysts predicted, including myself. Clearly, the rate hikes are causing serious crisis in equities markets. So why would they do that? Well, the issue here is I think it's sort of like a steam valve. They know the system is ripe for collapse, but they want to be able to bring it down at the rate that they want it to go down. There may come a point where you do have some chaos in the streets. You do have currency decline to the point of millions are starving. You could hit that point. Within the next couple of years, we could be at that point. They just want to be able to control that avalanche. They want to direct that avalanche to the end game that they prefer. So they're not going to I don't think it's going to be an overnight affair. It's going to happen. You'll see. We'll be down 10% in the markets for a couple of months, and then we'll be down another 10% after the next couple months, and another 10% after that. And I think that's how they're going to play this for the next couple of years.
Well, I mean, and that fits right in with what Richard Fisher said, that the front-loaded wealth effect, and now we have entered into a, quote, digestive period, end quote. And that's how digestion works.
Yeah, they love their innocuous terminology to explain really horrible things. They love that stuff.
Yes, they do. And final question, Brandon: what role will gold play in all of this, if any?
Well, I think gold is sort of stood the test of time. It's held considerable value the past 8 years or so, ever since the initial derivatives collapse of 2008, 2009. It lost some value, but it never dropped back down to where it was before the crash in 2008. Which a lot of analysts, including analysts in the Liberty movement, alternative analysts, were sort of claiming that gold is going to crash back down into the $300 to $400 range or $400 to $500 range, and it never did that because even with the manipulation of the paper markets and the ETFs and gold, there's still a considerable demand for a safe haven, a tangible safe haven, and I believe gold and silver are retaining their value because there's a major demand for that safe haven. And as we've seen in the past month or so, gold and silver are spiking again. I think they'll continue to do so for the rest of the year. You may have some, because of manipulation, you're going to see some major down days in the markets, in the commodities markets. You're going to see some major down days in gold and silver. But the trend, the overall trend, if you look at the long term, the overall trend will be way up for gold and silver.
Now, as far as the narrative that you've been reading, are these guys talking about gold and silver, or gold in particular? I mean, why is China amassing all of this gold along with Russia? I mean, both of those countries are at the highest level, are amassing just gargantuan quantities of gold. I mean, I would think that it would play some role, either backing part of this new world currency, or at least being at the table. I mean, or am I completely wrong in that?
Well, no, I think you're right, and I would also bring up the fact that the Bank of International Settlements has long been a sort of gold exchange system. They've always stockpiled gold. We have no idea how much gold they actually have, but once we have a move towards a new reserve currency system or a global currency, you're going to have something of tangible wealth, something of tangible value, in order to convince the masses that this new currency system is different or better than the dollar. All right, and I believe gold and silver will be used by the elites as at least a partial backer for the new currency, and that will be for a time. And then, they can remove the gold backing or the metals backing whenever they want at that point. But initially, when they get that new world reserve currency system going, I think they need at least the psychological plus of having gold as a backing for it.
That would make sense to me. So, well, Brandon, I certainly appreciate all your time today. This has been really incredible, and it's gone exactly how I thought it would go. So I really appreciate all the work that you're doing over at alt-market.com. And is there anything else that you would like to share with our audience before we let you go?
Yeah, I would just mention that I'm not all doom and gloom. I do write a lot about solutions to these problems, and I get a lot of people say, well, what, all you talk about is the collapse, and why don't you talk about what we're going to do about it? And I actually do. I write often about what can be done about it. So I would, if you have the time, go check out Google Alt Market Solutions, and you'll see dozens of articles I've written about various solutions to economic crisis. And then I would also check out the guys over at Oath Keepers, because they're doing a lot of great work in the area of solutions as well.
I would agree with that wholeheartedly. Well, Brandon, we certainly appreciate all your time, and I hope that we can do this again in the not too distant future.
Thanks, Rory. Thanks for having me on the show.
Well, I certainly appreciate it, and we'll talk with you soon.
All right, great.